Hi. Okay, slideshow beginning. Hi. One of the things that we need to remind ourselves is that we judge roses in classes. We don't judge them all in one big bunch. So that's how I'm starting here. We're starting also with the species and the old garden roses. Species in old garden roses come into three different categories. The species, which are Genesis roses, are wild roses, and then we divide the old garden roses into those prior to 1867, and then the classes from 1867 and later. Just a reminder that one of the neat things is with the species roses is that you see the darkened area across the top of the globe. These are the areas in the world where all species originated. There is absolutely no wild species in the Southern Hemisphere. But of course, obviously, they do grow them there at this point as well. One of the things that I've done tonight is I have put asterisks here on a number of statements that anybody taking the exam may want to take note of. The classifications that existed prior to 1867, which is the year of the introduction of the first Heiberg tea, La France, by Goulet, those are the ones that we use for the Dowager Award, and then we have those for varieties that are introduced after 1867 that belong to one of the classes. They're also considered to be old garden roses, but those are for the Victorian Award. There are actually 28 different classes in old garden roses. And the last comment here, an old garden rose with exhibition form is not eligible for queen now. For those who aren't familiar with the history of our rose shows, before 1867, the primary or the focal group of roses in a rose show were the hybrid perpetuals. And they were considered outstanding roses on their own. And actually today there are a number of them that are still outstanding. But over about a 50-year time period over the turn of the last century, the hybrid teas gradually replaced the hybrid perpetuals in rose shows, and even though they were both being exhibited in the same in fact, when I first started exhibiting roses back in the 1970s, at least one of the societies I belonged to still had the hybrid perpetuals and the hybrid teas in the same class. It is only in more recent years where the old garden roses, which is now the hybrid perpetuals, have been moved to that category. They're not any longer eligible for Queen of the Show. But it is an interesting history we have. When you're judging species in old garden roses, keep in mind we use the same point values to the 6' elements of judging as we do for any other class. You can show them one bloom per stem, with or without side buds, or with multiple florets with side buds. As far as judging, there's no preference. That meaning that if someone exhibits a one bloom per stem exhibit, it can win over one that has multiple florets. It depends on the quality of the exhibit. There's no DQ for stem on stem. Penalization obviously would be to the degree of distraction. And an entry without stem on stem would obviously be preferred. Usually, old garden roses are the most beautiful when in a fully open stage. And I could point out that there's a number of times that it is not true, but it is oftentimes it is. And I'm talking in particular when we have some of those that have a more modern form. And another one of the asterisks down here is on fragrance is not an old garden rose judging consideration. We often talk about old garden roses as having this wonderful fragrance, and yes, they often do, but it is not something we add in points for judging. Form, 25 points. The center pip or eye or button or quartering are normal and are not penalized. Note, that is another asterisk. Color, 20 points, including blotches and stripes, but whatever we have should be typical of that variety. And if it's fully open, the stamens need to be fresh. Substance, 15 points. Oftentimes of the old garden roses, we have some differences between those and modern roses, but again, it's what's typical of the variety, and we still need to have decent substance. Stem and foliage, 20 points. Missing leaves, crooked stems, disbudding scars, stem on stem should not be overly penalized, but again, to the degree of distraction. And if you have a better specimen that is competing against one, obviously the one with the fewer faults would be the winner. Old garden roses may have short stems. We're talking about balance and proportion. A specimen with better balance and proportion would be considered superior. And the size is judged on what is typical for the variety. Old garden roses can have a multitude or a very wide variety of forms, and here's just some of them. And yes, there are old garden roses, especially when you get into the hybrid perpetuals, that do have the modern form. I included this. This is from the Floribundas in our section in our schedule, just to remind you that many times we exhibit old garden roses, and later I'll be talking about shrubs and large flowered climbers. We often need to be reminded that the same characteristics that we look for in the Floribundas, the nice symmetry and the nice look, the side of the view of the spray, it has uniform shape. These are definitely characteristics that we will look for also in the old garden roses and the shrubs and the climbers. Species roses, these are some exhibits. We have Rosa gallica officinalis, which is one of the old medicinal roses. Beautiful stamens. We also have the spinosissima. And before somebody questions it again, one other time I was mentioning this rose, and yes, we have these different, the unique growth habit we have of some of these roses. I can't go back, okay, but I will just mention that it is to the degree of distraction. If a rose of any, we have very few disqualifications today, and if there is something that is unusual or lopsided or doesn't fit, it is to the degree of distraction that we penalize. It is not, we don't overtly look for the faults. Mother species, here's another one, Rosa satigera in the summertime, and one of the few summer blooming species. Again, stamens must be fresh. We want that symmetry, the nice oval shape. Old garden roses prior to 1867, Harrison's yellow. Again, here we have not as much uniformity as far as the symmetry of the specimen, but yet we have some gorgeous stamens, and overall the exhibit may well earn a blue ribbon. Old garden roses again, prior to 1867. Here's an individual specimen. Nice balance and proportion, nicely fresh, it had wonderful substance. Some of these are, this is gorgeous blooms. What we can see here of the stamens, they're nice and fresh. And you'll also notice that not all old garden roses have the perfect balance of a modern rose. They oftentimes will not have the foliage is balanced as on each side. We might say like have another leaf on the left side, but it's still an unusually beautiful rose. One more, again here, looking for the framing of the bloom by the foliage, the balance and proportion and the amount of foliage for the bloom. One of the things that I also like to see is that I love to find these extra buds. I think they actually set off the bloom. The only time that I have a problem with them is if they distort the bloom. And oftentimes the exhibitor can do something about that. They can actually gently bend the stem of these buds so that they're slightly away from the bloom, so they don't distract. Silver Queen here, 1886. Nice, clean bloom. Mrs. John Lang, I would point out to you, you notice that it has a more modern form. There was a significant time period before the hybrid teas took over at our rose shows that Mrs. John Lang was one of the top exhibits that you would find in national shows. Definitely was one of the longer reigning queens. Just a couple quick pictures. I find that the hybrid perpetuals, especially on a good year, and this year is going to be another one of those outstanding years, they can do wonders in your garden. Beautiful amount of bloom. The spring bloom obviously is the heaviest. They do some repeat, which is lovely. American Beauty is another one of the old hybrid perpetuals. Definitely has a history. It was one of the, for about 25 years, it was one of the most premier florist roses in this country. There were people who made their fortunes off of raising this under glass. I happen to have one plant. And it is quite lovely when it is in full bloom. Species in Old Garden Roses Awards. The Genesis Award goes to the best blue ribbon species rose. And you notice it got an asterisk on these. Dowager Queen, best blue ribbon Old Garden Rose introduced prior to 1867, or known to have been in existence prior to 1867. The Victorian Award is the best blue ribbon Old Garden Rose introduced in 1867 or later, or known to have been introduced into commerce in 1867 or later. If the Genesis Award is not offered, the species roses are eligible for Dowager or Victorian, depending on their date of introduction. Modern roses. And we're not going to talk about all the modern roses, but we're going to be talking about the large flowered climbers and the shrubs. And I wanted to just add this quick. First hybrid tea was introduced in 1867, La France. It, in some ways, to me, has looked at my garden, at least, like generally not all that different from Mrs. John Lang. A little bit larger bloom, generally, but color is about the same, and the form generally is quite similar. So you can see why some of these roses were competing in the same class and successfully competing against each other. And keep a note here, we got an asterisk. This is the first hybrid tea. So it was not allowed, once the hybrid perpetuals were removed from the hybrid tea class. And at that point, they became Old Garden Roses, and La France and the rest of them became the modern hybrid teas. Again, we're not talking tonight, I'm not talking tonight about these first three. We're talking about the large flower climbers, the shrubs, the classic and modern. The large flowered climbers are consisted of the hybrid Burcherianus, the hybrid giganteas, and the ramblers. And it is possible that any particular local show can pull out any one of these and make a separate class. The classifications are often based on growth habit rather than the flower form. You'll find all kinds of flower forms here. Again, an asterisk. And here we have species with one bloom that will compete against sprays, unless for some reason that a particular Roche society decides to have two separate classes. But when you have two separate classes, then if you're going to give the ARS award for large flower climbers, the winners of each of those two separate classes would again compete against each other for that award, because you would not be able to get two separate ones. All of these classifications may be separated. Climbing varieties of other classifications are shown with their non-climbing varieties. In other words, if you had a climbing Mr. Lincoln, there is shown with Mr. Lincoln hybrid teas. The same is true with any other rows. The 6 prime elements also apply here. Just a quick review, same considerations that apply to floribunda sprays apply to judging climbers. And it's the overall shape and the configuration of spray and the form of individual florets. There is no preference for exhibition form. If somebody has a particular spray that does generally show as exhibition form, it will not necessarily win because of that. The color is what is typical of the variety. We want substance and the freshness of the stamens and petals. The faults are not overly penalized, but especially being as stem and foliage is only 20%. And less stem and foliage is often required to balance a climber than the solitary climber bloom. And part of it is because just the way they grow. The size, there's two considerations, whether the overall spray and the individual florets. If the balance and proportion is pleasing, a larger spray and larger floret size is rewarded. Judging one bloom per stem climbers. Climbers may be exhibited either as one bloom per stem specimens or as sprays. Disbudding is optional. One bloom per stem specimen with or without side buds should not be disqualified unless the class is explicitly limited to sprays. They're judged by the same standards as other one bloom per stem specimens, and they're judged by the standards of the variety with no preference given for exhibition form. Just that is a reminder, you need to know that. A spray of the same variety as a one bloom per stem specimen would be given higher consideration. And that is a difference between having one variety that's a single bloom, another variety that is a spray. There we do not reward one versus the other. But if it's the same variety, then the one bloom per stem specimen can be given a little bit of consideration. And if I make myself clear, the spray, because it has more blooms, would be given the higher consideration. And the best climber is the best blue ribbon winner. Just a few climbers. In Minnesota here, we love David Slezak's Above and Beyond. It can make a beautiful spray, and it can actually look lovely as a one bloom per stem. This particular exhibit that I took a photograph of is obviously not a top specimen because the blooms are not, they could be more fully open. More of them could be open. The balance and proportion is quite good, but it possibly would not be a blue ribbon winner. Here in another one we have, this is an exhibit of cherry frost. It throws absolutely lovely sprays that are hard to beat. But you will also notice it's difficult to get a significant amount of foliage in the spray. There's some more down below, but when you get that a large spray, it often doesn't grow with as much foliage right close to the blooms. Morning Magic. Again, we're looking for that nice domed or nice, at least we're looking for symmetry in particular on these blooms. Now this is an excellent example of having a gorgeous symmetrical spray with the stamens bright and a good balance and proportion of the foliage. Here's Night Owl. And I believe I included this partially because to point out that you could actually remove a fair amount of that stuff there in the middle and come up with actually a much better specimen. Classic shrubs. Here's some examples. Nevada, Buff Beauty, Morris Striped Rugosa, and George Vancouver are examples of these, of the 4 types of classic shrubs. Here's a Grotendorst, F.J. Grotendorst, hybrid rugosa. Little story behind this. I first planted a couple of plants of this in my backyard. It wasn't for the blooms that I planted it. I planted it for traffic control for the local children, to keep them out of my beds. And it didn't take too much to keep the kids out. Later, I moved these into a more permanent location. And today I still enjoy these blooms and their little frilly petals. One of my favorite roses in recent years has been Morris Striped Rugosa. Ralph Moore obviously produced and gave us all kinds of miniatures that we have loved. But this is another one of his, and I absolutely adore it. Buff Beauty makes a beautiful spray. Notice the older blooms are fade out. They're not as bright as the fresher, younger ones, but it's still really nice. George Vancouver makes a nice spray as well. These photographs generally I took them as we were a number of years ago, as we were creating a virtual rose show, which turns out that they're ideal for this purpose as well. Party Hardy, delightful. Look how nice that cluster is. Modern shrubs. Today we also have a division in our modern shrubs, and just a reminder, we don't have all these officially divided in our classification books and stuff at the moment, but it's coming. The other thing with modern shrubs is this is where we have a court. So, okay, first of all, the divisions: English style, antique style roses, and obviously most of us are very familiar with the English style roses. Everything, all of the
David Austin.
All the David Austin roses, right, correct, thank you. And then we have the ground cover roses. We have a lot of roses that are very suitable for roadways and small areas, and they grow low and they still bloom. Wonderful blooms. And the landscape shrubs are our classification that for anything else that does not fit into the other two classes. Some examples: all the rage and modern shrub. This would certainly be in the other class. Here we go, Fair Bianca, one of the English roses. And they have a very distinctive look. And they're not all Austin roses, but there's a significant number of them are. Navy Lady, another one of the Canadian roses. Modern shrubs. And then we have Easy on the Eyes. We have, which are looking at a number of these that have the Healthemia in their background. Chinook Sunrise, we have another of the Canadians. And it's an absolutely beautiful plant. Judging shrubs. Shrub roses include the large group of roses from after 1867 that did not easily fit into the other classifications. 6 prime elements of judging are applied. And asterisk again, shrubs may be exhibited as one bloom per stem, with or without side buds, or with multiple florets with side buds. There's no preference for judging. In other words, don't give one type, one bloom per stem, or a spray. We don't give one or the other extra points. And the exhibitor may enter either a one bloom per stem specimen or a spray in each of the shrub classes, unless the schedule has separate classes for one bloom per stem and sprays. And it's not, the schedule is what counts, how it's written in the schedule. The primary consideration is the overall appearance. Stem on stem may be penalized according to the degree of distraction. And there are times when it is hardly visible and should not be penalized. We keep going back to these 6 prime elements, and because they are important and they apply to each of our classes as we judge. Shape and configuration of the spray and the form of the individual florets in the form. Color, typical of the variety, and fresh stamens. Petal crispness and freshness is standard. Stem and foliage. Don't overly penalize small things. Balance and proportion, shorter stems and less foliage are generally needed on sprays and on one bloom per stem specimens, but when you get into the whole garden roses, the climbers, and the shrubs, you have to be a little bit more considerate of the fact that there's a lot of differences. Size, 2 important considerations: the size of the overall spray and the size of the individual florets. One bloom per stem shrubs may be exhibited as one bloom per stem or as sprays. Disbudding, one bloom per stem is optional. It all depends on what it's written in the show schedule. Each specimen is judged by the standards of its variety. No preference is given to varieties with exhibition form. And it's similar to each time around. But again, get it clear in your mind, because these are things you will need to know forever as you're judging. The classic shrubs, best blue ribbon. Modern shrub, best blue ribbon. And a shrub, it can be best blue ribbon if classic and modern shrub certificates are not offered at a show. But again, now we have the modern shrub, queen, king, and princess, and the gold, silver, and bronze certificates. And those are actually a lot of fun, because we have keep on getting more and more of these wonderful new shrubs. A quick summary: the awards, they're given to award rose name, class, and date when the award is eligible for. Don't forget your prime elements. We have 5 quarts that are possible. Now, I haven't talked about the hybrid tea, the Floribunda spray, the miniature, and mini flora, but we have the modern shrub is in this section we're talking tonight. Species old garden rose, climbers, and shrubs. No judging preference for the 1 bloom per stem, with or without side buds, multiple florets, with or without side buds. Sprays and 1 bloom per stem. In general, all sprays are judged similar to Floribunda sprays because we're looking for a symmetrical top and profile and the largest number of blooms in exhibition stage. No preference is given to exhibition form, however. In general, 1 bloom per stem. Most characteristics are judged similar to hybrid tea grandiflora, 1 bloom per stem. And that's the end here.
Thank you, Lois. We'll now move on to the next class, and that's going to be
Rita.
given by Rita, and she will be covering Court of Honor. And President Summers will now talk about Rita.
Well, we'll just introduce Rita. How about that? I want to thank Rita for joining us tonight. This is the first time for Rita as well as a speaker. So we have a number of first-time speakers, which is just great because I know everybody likes to hear from different people around the country. And Rita is also a North Central District judge. So I'm starting to think, gosh, this became a North Central District night. That really wasn't the plan overall. Rita is one of those, I'll say, newer members of our district, but what Rita stands out for is she's always raising her hand and volunteering. And I really, really appreciate that. She's also an expert at drying roses and creating beautiful arrangements and rose art with them. And she's actually going to be doing a program for us later this year on how to do that. So stay tuned for that program as well. So at this point, I'd just like to turn it over to Rita. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. Can everyone hear me and see my program?
Yes, we can.
Beautiful.
Oh, Rita, I'm sorry. Before you go, just to
Okay.
notice to all the participants here, we are having some very, very bad storms in Shreveport. And I think we're going to all be okay. But if we start juggling a few things around or whatever, just be aware that that's what's going on behind the scenes. And so the internet service may be a little spotty in Shreveport. I think we're fine the way we have this structured, but just in case, just wanted to let you know that. Thank you, and I'll let Rita go on.
All right, thank you. As Diane said, I'm relatively new with speaking, but I've been growing roses since I was a teenager and been a part of the Twin Cities Rose Club and the North Central District, gradually increasing my participation and volunteerism for at least 20 years now. So time does fly. So the reference we need to use as judges is the Guidelines and Rules for Judging Roses. You should be able to find pretty much everything in there for judging the court, and that is on chapter 16, pages 16.1 and 16.2. It was most recently revised in 2021, and I'm sure there will be more updates as time goes by. So don't get too comfortable, but make sure you're following the current rules. As a reminder, we've got the 5 courts of honor. Previously, it was just the hybrid tea grandiflora court, the Floribunda spray court, the modern shrub court is new, and the miniature court has been around for a while. And in 1999, the mini floras came into existence under ARS, and so we also have the mini flora court. When we're judging the court, we need to remember that the specimens brought forward are already blue ribbon winners, and we are dealing with the best of the best. For the hybrid tea grandiflora, We are looking for exhibition form, but not everything will have exhibition form. So we have to be careful to judge what is typical for the variety. There's going to be different stages of openness. Some things look better and they might only be slightly over a quarter open. Some things might be more full and maybe about 3/4 open. But regardless, we need to find that most perfect phase of beauty and reward that specimen that demonstrates that. Additionally, symmetry is very important, and that's also something we need to look at. For the Floribunda spray, as Lois Ann had said, there are points and preferences given to the configuration of the spray and the form of those individual florets. We need to not necessarily or not give more points to a spray with 2 or more blooms compared to a single. It's just depending on how things are arranged, the quality of the blooms, the color, and all the other basic elements of judging. Modern shrub. This is also an area that it can be kind of sticky to judge because you might be judging a spray versus a single bloom. And of course, there's going to be all different kinds of varieties of blooms, some fully double and some very full and some single. But overall, we want a pleasing form to the spray, and we want consistency of color that is consistency to the variety. Mini flora sometimes has similar considerations as a hybrid tea. There are many that are exhibition form with that high center point, and those are very lovely. But on the other hand, there are some that are exhibition state or exhibition form that is not necessarily with the high center, and we can't really reward one over the other. We're also looking for degrees of openness and symmetry and color and everything else you've learned so far. And miniatures. Sometimes it can be hard to judge the minis because they're smaller, they're more compact. It's sometimes more difficult to see if the balance and proportion is off. And you have to get right down there and look at them. But all the same judging criteria applies to miniatures as for singles or hybrid teas or grandifloras. Under the American Rose Society, the judges will decide on the ARS Queen, King, and Princess certificates. That relates to gold, silver, and bronze. There may be other exhibits on the court that are rewarded. I know up in the North Central District and the Central District, sometimes we will award court for the top 10 exhibits, especially for those kinds of shows that have an abundance of hybrid teas or an abundance of shrubs. It all depends on the show chair and the committee and the show schedule. We all have our favorite roses, me included, but as a judge, you have to be willing to put that aside and waive any preference for a particular variety or class or color or form or type, like a hybrid tea versus a shrub versus a species. They all have their own attributes, and I would challenge you to try growing a variety of roses, because that may allow you to be more open-minded and appreciate the variety of roses give to us and those rose characteristics when judging. And additionally, I would highly encourage you, as we're all supposed to do, to bring our own exhibits, if not in the main show or in the arrangement section, add them into the judges class, because it really does make you a better judge as far as knowing what to look for and better understanding of the whole judging experience. So now you're the judge. They've already decided which ones are going to be the blue ribbons. The clerks have put all the ribbons on. And now you're facing the task of helping to judge the court. So maybe there's some roses that you've never seen before, especially if you're new to judging, or you're judging in another district, or you're judging for a national show, or you get a chance to travel in another part of the country. Maybe you didn't see all the specimens in the show. Typically, the judging assignments split a class. So for miniatures, you might be judging A through M, but the second team of judges might be judging N through Z. And then all these blue ribbon winners come together to judge for judging the court. And you've maybe never got to see what was in place or what got the blue ribbons or what was competing. And importantly, time has passed since you saw our judges initially. You could be done with your judging and maybe an hour or even 2 hours has passed, depending on the number of judging teams and how many specimens there are in the show. There's changes because, you know, just with time, temperature, maybe the room has gotten colder or hotter. The clerks are handling the specimens and moving them around so the judges can see them or to place them on a different table. Maybe there's some that are needing some water, and then you can direct the clerks to add water so that when it gets to the court judging, it can be hydrated and given a fair chance. Lighting is another thing that changes. I've often judged in rooms where there's morning or afternoon sun, and when it changes over, maybe that was in the sun in the morning, but there's no sun in the afternoon. So that may affect how the progression of the maturity of the bloom is, or how you even see the color or the texture. Well, it doesn't matter how they were to begin with. It doesn't matter if you are not familiar with a variety and didn't see them before. You need to judge what you see now, what's brought before you. And you're probably tired of hearing this, but the more you hear it, hopefully the better you can remember. The form is 25, color is 20, substance 15, stem and foliage 20, balance and proportion is 10, and size is 10 points. They were judged on this scale an hour or two before, but now the blue ribbon winners have to be judged again. And this is an opportunity to look closer and in more detail and find the superior blooms and exhibits. So you judge it now, sometime, and maybe before the buds were tight, but now they're better because time has gone by, or it's in the sun, or that the room is heated up. Maybe it was good before, but now it's too far open. Singles, sometimes maybe they were open when the exhibitor brought them, but the room has gotten colder and now they've closed up a little bit. So either way, no matter what, you need to judge the current appearance. And without preference or bias, using the prime elements. And importantly, make your decisions quietly. Try not to disturb the other judges. If you see something outstanding, control your oohs and ahs, and try not to grumble about why is this here, who judged this last, because it doesn't matter. We all judge them at the time and we do the best we can. What it all boils down to is that we are trying to find those specimens which are at their perfect phase of possible beauty for their variety, type, or classification. As you judge, you want to find, like I said, you want to find those which most closely approaches perfection for that class, whether it's a single, a decorative form, a high center, whatever it may be. And this really applies to the court especially. Each specimen, the blue ribbon winners, are going to be judged by individual written ballots provided for those judges for each court. When I've been judging, generally it's a piece of paper that's cut in a square or a card of some sort or some sort of paper. So bring your pen or pencil so you can make your opinions known. And again, the prime elements of judging. Let's see, voting and tabulation. There's different methods, probably within districts, within societies, within the country, national versus district versus local shows, to come up with a tabulation and votes for finding out what will be queen or king or princess or other members of the court. One method is that the show chair or the judge's chair or their designee will direct the clerks to bring all the blue ribbon entries from the class or classes of the schedule to one area, and each one of those specimens are given a number or letter. Most frequently is a number. This is helpful because you don't have to remember or look at the tags and look at somebody's handwriting or not be able to read the variety, but just focus on the specimens themselves. The blue ribbon winners might also include those from the youth or novice classes. And on your book, it'll say small garden roses as well. So it's all going to depend on the schedule that you're provided. So make sure you study this before you go to show. And if you're just starting out, you really need to study things so you can understand, and don't be afraid to ask questions so you understand better. So you've got these blue ribbon specimens. They all got their ribbons on them. They look beautiful, but each judge should take time to inspect closely each specimen, orderly rotate with the other judges until everyone has gotten to see the candidates. And then on your paper, if you're going to vote for number 2 or number 16, then you will do that, and then you hand that to the person who is in charge of those, oftentimes the show chair. Then those votes are counted, and the one receiving a significant amount of votes is the queen. Sometimes there will be 2 or 3 that are very close, and the bottom, the exhibits that are not awarded or not voted on, maybe by 1 or 2 votes or no votes, may be dropped, and you may have to re-vote. But let's say on the next vote, number 8 is the queen, and then that's taken off the table. The next vote is going to be for king, so the most votes for a specific specimen, say number 19 gets king. And if it's difficult to discern from the tabulations of the numbers written down, there may have to be another vote until there's more of a consensus, and so on. And then princess is voted on until the court is filled. The court may be the top 5, it may be the top 10, depending on the preference of the show chair and the number of specimens. I know some shows I've gone to, they do like to have the top 10 or the top 8. So the court is filled. But as I said earlier, only the top three, the queen, the king, and the princess, will get the certificate. There's a couple other methods. Sometimes judges are asked to rank the specimens in order. What is your first? What is your second? What is your third? Going by the perfection of the variety. And so the one with the most votes is queen, the second most votes is king, and the third is princess. Sometimes this is kind of difficult because depending on how many specimens there are, you may not be able to quickly come up with those court specimens. And another method is for the judges to vote for the best three, or the best five, or the best 10, depending on the number of the court that the show chair wants. And then those that don't receive those votes are out of contention. So maybe 2, 4, 6, and 8 is left. And so we'll just vote on the next amount, or the next specimens. Things are reorganized, moved together. And then as a judging panel of 1, you go and orderly look at those again, and you can vote on the best out of those, just depending on what the show chair wants you to do. So when you're voting, make sure you're paying attention. Don't leave the area until everything's been voted on. Like I said, there's 5 courts. Or if you do have to go to the restroom, make sure you're letting the show chair or your judging team know. But you really do need to be there to see what's going on. So we've got the best of the best. We've got our courts for all 5. They're all best in class winners. And from those, with possibly the winners of the challenge classes and or the collections, or possibly the winners, the certificate winners of arrangements and the photos, we can come up with the best show. Sometimes it's the best bloom from the entire room. Sometimes it's limited to certain classes. And again, that's going to be in the show schedule and follow the directions for voting on the best in show. Obviously, if yours happens to be up in contest, you cannot vote. The best in show is not necessarily the largest and the showiest blooms. The biggest display, the tallest, the widest, the deepest red, the whitest white, but it's the most superior exhibit, taking everything into consideration, the form, the color, and all those prime elements. It's the one that exceeds the normal standards, the wow of the show. And again, keep an open mind while judging, because it may not be something that you would have in your garden, but because it's the best of the show and it's an amazing entry, it needs to be rewarded. Any questions? If we're having questions, if not, I will hold on until later.
Thank you, Rita. We will do a discussion session in a little bit.
Thank you.
Those in Shreveport have gotten through the storm that was bothering them, so we're able to continue as planned. So the next program will be by Bob Heiberg, and he will be talking about judging ethics.
Well, just a couple of words, I guess. We've all met Bob before, right, through these sessions, and I can't think of anyone better to talk about ethics than Bob Heiberg. So with that, another North Central District judge and actually the district chair for the North Central District. Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diane. I neglected either before or after my last talk to give appropriate thanks to some people. So I'd like to now give thanks to Lois Ann Helgeson and Linda Clark, who's following me, and Diane for all of their hard work on the revisions to the guidelines that were just adopted by the district chairs and approved by the board and the ARS, and are going to be published within the next few days. A lot of hard work, a lot of deep thought went into those changes to make the guidelines better for judging roses. And I'd like to also give a special thanks to Diane Summers. Worked with her now locally as a judge, and then shows that she's chaired, shows that she's exhibited in, and you couldn't find a better exhibitor or a better judge. But she has been an exceptional leader for the ARS as vice president and as president. And in the middle of all of the difficulties we had with getting our judges current on their educational credits, including giving it a one-year extension for COVID, and setting up a couple of previous annual judging seminars to try to get everybody on board, and with lots of people who were intimidated or upset or angry about how that all played out. Diane has been a steady force, fair, kind, conciliatory, and strong leadership through all of that. And she even took over the head of national horticulture judging when our previous national head had to resign, and has done a marvelous job doing that. I can't possibly imagine how busy she has been and how she has done it all with grace and kindness and excellence. So thank you, Diane.
It's very kind. Thank you, Bob.
So judging ethics is my subject, and we've got quite a bit of stuff on judging ethics. And I'd like to, however, point out that we in my 30 years of judging, we have not had in our district or in any shows that I've been involved with any even remote suspicion that a judge is being intentionally biased and is intentionally favoring a friend or a local exhibitor or anything else that would indicate that they were not doing their best to judge the roses fairly and objectively. So why do we want to spend time on judging ethics? Well, it turns out that there probably have been some behaviors that might make other people worry about the ethics of the judge, either other judges or exhibitors. And we just want to discuss those behaviors and just try to warn everybody what you should do and should not do in some of the situations. To be an ARS accredited rose judge is a hard-earned honor and privilege, carrying with it the obligation and responsibility to act with objectivity, fairness, courtesy, respect, honesty, and integrity. Judging must not only actually be fair, but also appear to be fair to all the exhibitors. If you look at when they talk about fairness in courts of law and other competitions, whether it's sports or whatever, the appearance of fairness is equally important to the actual fairness, because if people don't think it's fair, it doesn't make any difference whether it's fair or not. We've had now with these 2024 changes in the guidelines, the guidelines are now going to permit and even encourage judges to enter shows in which they are judging. And that poses many questions concerning actual and perceived fairness. When this rule was proposed, I polled a number of our younger exhibitors, and the exhibitors who are not judges, some of our veteran judges, and several people that I know that do judging and other hobbies. And it was very interesting to me that the newer exhibitors, the ones who weren't familiar with the process, who weren't familiar with the veteran judges, were almost all totally appalled that we would even think of letting a judge enter a show in which they are exhibiting, or to judge a show in which they are exhibiting. Nevertheless, many of the societies over the years have done that on a regular basis with little or no problems or objections or whatever. So I think it's possible for the to judge a show fairly with the judges who have entered doing judging. But we all agreed when the rule was approved, it was going to be a close vote on whether that rule was going to be approved or not. And the concession was made that it would be at that would be the preferred method, but at the option of the show chairman in that particular show, they could just not have entries by judges who were judging. And that then got the vote, as long as that option was available and the feeling was high in a particular club or district that that should not happen, the show chair could just not allow the exhibitors to judge in the show. The only one absolute rule is that a judge may never judge his or her own rows, and how that will be handled. Maybe Linda's going to talk more about that when she talks about the rule. There are lots of different ways to handle that and make that happen, and to try to keep the judging speedy and efficient with that going on. So the attitude of the judge, flexibility, guidelines, and I personally recommend that you've got to take into consider local growing conditions at the time of the show. That, of course, wouldn't happen for the national show, I mean, even for a district show. But in local shows, you really need to take that into consideration, because that's something that's going to affect all of the exhibitors. I like to take a quick walk around of the show before judging formally starts to see the general quality of exhibits. If you do a walk through the hybrid T class, you can't see a blue ribbon. You may have to think a little bit about what your standard is for that particular show. Again, not a national show, and probably maybe not even a district show, but for local shows, that's important. You talk with the show chairperson and all the other local judges about current growing conditions. I mean, was there a hailstorm on Friday or Thursday before the show on Saturday? That sort of thing. Hopefully your show has a placement or identification committee, and so that all of the roses have been placed in the proper places, in the proper classes, and all working with a judge so that they, before the teams get out on the floor, pretty much everything is the right place. I just want to give an example of what can go wrong when that doesn't happen. I judged a show recently where the roses were placed in the classes as numbered on the tables, but they were not put in alphabetical order before the judges got there, which meant the judges had to spend about 15 minutes in the larger classes alphabetizing the roses and getting the duplicate entries of the same variety stacked up against each other. So all of a sudden now the show is going to be hurried because there's a deadline that's been set up by which the show judge is supposed to be done. You've already wasted the first 15 minutes of the show doing that. Then, of course, as you look at each individual entry, you have to be sure that it's in the right class. Well, got to in this particular show, so things didn't get off to a very good start. We ended up getting to the head tables. We were under time pressure. We were doing the courts individually and racing back and judging the entries in another class and rushing up and doing another head table. And we were using the system where the roses were marked with letters. And as Rita said, that would help you not have to look at the entry tag. But we had a problem in that the queen of the show, which was misclassed. The queen of the show for minis was a mini flora that hadn't been recognized by the placement committee or by the judges or by all of the judges when they came up to the table, again in a hurry. I'm sure some of them didn't even read the entry tags. So they didn't even know what the variety was, or if they knew what variety it was, they didn't recognize that it was a mini flora. So then it moved on from there to the table where they were writing the certificates, and somebody sitting at that table says, "Hey, this queen of the minis is a multiflora." So the judges were all called back together, and it was decided the best way to cure it, because it says if you've got roses that are misclassed, if practicable, whatever that means, you should rejudge the class. So we went back, we moved the mini queen to the multiflora class. We rejudged the court for the minis and got a new queen, king and princess. We went to the multiflora class, and we discovered that there was in the court for multifloras another one of this variety that had been the mini queen. And it was actually the one that was in the already in the court of honor for the mini flora class, was a better specimen of this particular variety. So the long and the short of it, what used to be the mini queen was now a red ribbon in a multiflora class, all because there was one entry that was misclassed. So it's just
Hey,
a
Bob,
warning.
just to interrupt you, you mean mini flora,
Mini
right?
flora.
Not multiflora, mini
Right.
flora. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, mini flora. And it just shows the necessity at each step here of being very careful to check that you're not getting misclassed. It's especially difficult with mini floras and minis, because we have some very large minis, and we have some smaller mini floras, and it's really hard just to look at them to tell what they are. You've got to read the name, and you've got to look it up in one of the sources to see what they are, to be sure that if you're not, if none of the judges are familiar with what it is. It's just a warning. Very embarrassing for everybody, but we at least got it right in the end. But it's embarrassing for everybody that that kind of thing happens. Positive judging is the first and foremost, concentrating, as many of us have said before, concentrating on the beauty of each specimen and the positive impact it has on the senses. I've been asked a number of times, well, what kind of a hobby is judging roses? Why would you do that for a hobby? The best answer I guess I can have is that I was judging at a very good show in Madison, Wisconsin a few years ago with Bruce Barr. I don't know whether Bruce is on this the broadcast or not. With Bruce Barr, and we're looking and we're seeing the entry, good entry after good entry after good entry. And all of a sudden, Bruce just stands up and he says, "Bob." And I thought, oh, we missed something. What's he saying? He says, "Bob, do you have any idea how fortunate we are to be surrounded by this much beauty?" And I've always remembered that as for when somebody asks me, "Why do you judge roses?" It's the best explanation I've heard. And that all underlines the reason for positive judging. After you are doing the positive judging, of course, you've got to do the objective judging, not negative, but evaluating each exhibit for the conformance with the objective standards set forth in the guidelines and the highest standards set forth for the variety. The judge has to be objective. And that means using the vocabulary and the point system so that they can't say that this is subjective. It is, of course, in many ways subjective, but you try to apply the objective standards so that you do come to a fair result. Disqualifications become minor compared to what it used to be. And we always try to resolve them grounds for disqualification in favor of the exhibitor. We pointed out in my last program, and Satish reminded us that in the misnaming of the rose, that is the one that, when it comes right down to the fact that it is misnamed, and you can't figure out how it should have been named, it has to be disqualified. And the judges, of course, all have to subjugate their personal preferences. It just, you cannot say, oh my goodness, I really like Double Delight. I think that's the best rose never been hybridized. Well, you know, that's your opinion. You're entitled to it, but that's not how you judge roses. Now, you also have some of your responsibilities are directly to the exhibitors. You obviously has to come to the show prepared. I try to get my district judges to be, every show, you must read the schedule. I try to read it twice and mark anything that I don't understand so we can discuss it with the show chairman during the judges meeting. If also before the first show of the season, I read the guidelines. And if there's any issue that came up at the previous show, I try to read the next show. I try to read that part of the guidelines over again to be sure that we got it right the last time and we get it right this time.
Tanya or Crystal, could you please advance the slides for us? Thank you.
Yeah, we're on responsibility to exhibitors. We recommend that the judges stay out of the preparation area and off the show floor prior to judging, if possible, given the venue. I know some of our venues have a problem where it's really hard to get the judges, there's no place for the judges to go, or the preparation room and the show floor in the same room, or the rolls and coffee are being served in the showroom and not in the room the judges are. But it just looks better if the judges aren't there watching the exhibitors enter and prepare. Now, when judges are going to be exhibitors, the ideal, of course, would be to have a separate prep room for the judges. But in your venues, that might be hard to have that many rooms and that many areas. So also try to avoid lengthy interactions with the exhibitors prior to judging. Most of us have a lot of friends and Rose colleagues that are judges and exhibitors, and the only time you get to see them during the year, if they're not in your local society, is at the shows, and you want to catch up with them and their families and everything else. But after the show is preferred to before the show. Somehow you see judges hugging exhibitors in the prep room. It does not inspire confidence in the other exhibitors. Once you're on the show floor, you don't want to make disparaging remarks about the exhibit. Some exhibits are going to be poor. They're not going to be even entitled to a white honorable mention ribbon. But you don't want to make disparaging comments. I've heard comments like, you know, that is the worst veterans honor I've ever seen. These are comments, actual comments from judges. Or how could anybody possibly enter that? Well, of course, that's not positive judging, but it's also, you've got to realize that most of your clerks in your show are probably exhibitors, and that might be one of their entries. And what better way to discourage an exhibitor ever permanently is for have a judge to say something about like that about their entries. You know, it speaks for itself. They didn't get a ribbon. You don't need to say things like that. Never touch the bloom. That's part of the judging ethics. You don't want to alter the form or substance or color of the bloom by touching it. You touch the vase only if necessary to get a more complete view of the exhibit. You got to be very careful not to disturb the bloom while you're doing that, or knock over other exhibits. You got a lot of exhibits on the table. You're grabbing vases out of there. You can knock them over. The only reason usually for judging it for doing that is to spin the entry tag around so you can read it, because they got placed on the table with the entry tag facing away from you. The other time is if especially with your tall hybrid teas, if you've got judges who are vertically challenged. that cannot really, even standing on their tiptoes, get a top-down view of the rows sitting up on a tall table. So in those cases, we've had to either move it to a lower table or move it or hold it lower for them or set it on the floor for them. But you're never to touch the bloom, and try not to touch it. In challenge classes, you are of course not allowed to touch the exhibit at all, because part of the points for challenge classes are for the doing staging that enhances the exhibit in the geometry you use, or the order of the blooms in the exhibit. So you've got to be not touching things in the challenge class. That may give the challenge class a real name because it's a challenge for judges, especially when the exhibitor has attached all of the ribbons, all of the entry tags on each of the vases, and they face away from the judges. You can't read the variety. Or they try to jam all of the names of the 10 different varieties onto one entry tag, and you can't read it. But you just have to do the best you can with that to try to do it without touching the exhibit. If an exhibit needs to be disqualified, you need to say why. Give them a short description on the entry tag. Again, to encourage you, you've got a duty to the exhibitors to know why it got disqualified or severely penalized. This one I hadn't really thought of until a couple of years ago, but I make mental notes of the blue ribbon winners that I've seen, that I've judged when I'm judging in a class. And the reason for this is we got up to the judge the court in a show that I had judged, and the entry that we gave a blue ribbon to an entry that I had to try to stifle myself, saying that's my favorite, which I did. But I particularly noted that because it was rows that I grow and doesn't often make the court of honor, and I was happy to see it up there. We got all done. We spread out the hybrid teas on the thing, and I'm looking for that one because I'm going to compare it to the others and see how it looks, and it's not there. And it was a clerk's error. The clerk just neglected to bring one blue ribbon up to the table. And the only way that's going to get caught before the whole thing is judged is for the judges to have sort of mental notes on what the blue ribbons are that they've seen out there and be sure they're up at the table. Another responsibility of the exhibitor is to be available after the show to answer their questions. Some shows even provide for a guided tour of the show, both for the general public and for exhibitors, so that they can ask. And of course, you need to explain to them, as Rita just told us about, you have the judges that they were, explain to people that they were judged at the time, what they looked like at the time that that the judges saw them, and then, half hour, an hour, hour and a half have gone by since that judging happened. So that could be a reason that those exhibits do not look quite as good as somebody might think they did. You also have obligations to show chairman and committee. You should always try to judge as many shows as you reasonably can in the season. Respond promptly to judging invitations, giving the limited number of available judges, accept or decline promptly, and so that they can extend the offer to judge to others if you are unable or unwilling to judge in that show. We had a situation this year which was unusual. We were a little bit short of judges because we had a number that hadn't requalified or recertified yet. We had two of our biggest local shows in our district scheduled for the same day, which of course you should try to avoid. But both of those societies have venues that are scheduled long in advance, and if they happen to be on the same day every year, you can't change the same weekend every year. You can't change or risk losing your venue. But of course, we should, when scheduling shows, try to avoid that. But so we had one of the societies started inviting judges in December. So the other society had to scramble to start judging, within 2 weeks later, trying to round up judges. And, we should try to avoid that if we can. If you need to cancel, do it as early as possible so you can be replaced. Very rarely before COVID did we ever have a judges cancel at the last minute. But since then, we've, at least I've seen that we've had more and more cancellations. And obviously there, illness or family obligations or something major unforeseeable occurs, you have to cancel. And, you got to have your priorities straight, and family and, always, personal health always governs over your obligations to the Rose Society. But it makes it very difficult. We had a show last year where within about 2 weeks of the show, 3 out of the judges, I think, I don't know how many judges they had, 6 or 8 judges, and 3 of them canceled. Well, that really, and it was a district show, so it was a big show, and that's really difficult on your show chairman to locate the judges. We were able to replace all of the judges, and but it was a matter of some people driving 600 miles on 10 days notice to help them out. But again, if you're available, you should be willing to do those kind of last minute things when they pop up. Should arrive early for the judges meeting and to assist in any other ways. If they decided the judges should be on the placement and identification committee, to do that, or to check to see that the exhibits have been alphabetized, or anything else that might help the show progress on a timely fashion. But it's up to the show chairman what you do. So long as the ARS rules are followed, the schedule controls, and the chair's interpretation of the schedule controls, even though it was not the way you would do it. An example would be many shows are now judging they'll judge hybrid teas first, or challenge classes first. Let's do hybrid tea first, then they'll set up the table to judge the hybrid tea class, sending you back to judge 1 or 2 classes while you're setting up, then having the judges come back up and to judge the mini floras, and so that the classes are not all judged, the courts are not all judged at the end of the show. That does facilitate getting the head table set up and the certificates prepared, that sort of thing. It also sometimes, though, creates chaos on the floor with all the judges moving and then losing track of where they were, and the possibility that parts of classes get missed when that happens. So whichever way the show chairman has decided that it was going to take place is the way it should take place. And this is not the time to suggest an alternative method. Again, when the show is over, if you have constructive suggestions on how the show schedule could be changed to improve the show for next year, you can certainly make them to the show chairperson at that time. At the same time, you're congratulating that person for all the hard work and putting this thing together and having it safely conducted. Next are the obligations to other judges. If you can advance the slide there, thank you. Tact and courtesy should govern. Obviously, you shouldn't disparage another judge to their face. That's just, of course, and I've never seen that happen. But I've also seen when somebody is, when the show is over, talking to other judges, and even in one case when they were talking to exhibitors as they were going around, criticizing the competency of one or more of the other judges, which obviously should not be done publicly. You need an attitude of humility. You may think you're pretty smart. You may think you're experienced and you have memorized the guidelines and can recite them from memory. But you really need an attitude of humility as you go through there, that the people you're judging with are as experienced and know as much as you do. And so keep that in mind in your discussions. You work collegially as a team, express your opinions with tact and diplomacy, respectfully discuss, and if outvoted, you graciously move on. I've seen a judge, when he was outvoted, as the rest of the team and the judges and the clerks move on, to stay there at the table looking woefully at the exhibit that he had voted for and didn't win. That we don't need to do that kind of stuff. If there's an even number of judges on your team by accident or circumstances, like if they're in a show where the judges can judge their entries and they step back when they come to one of their entries, if there's a tie vote, there's a difference of opinion, you don't just stand and argue. You call in another judge from another team or the show chair, if the show chair is a judge, and have that person break the tie, accept the results, and move on. If you finish before the other teams, your team finishes before the other teams, volunteer to the chair to help teams who are behind. Sometimes, for some reason, a team gets behind. It's either because, well, it's for many reasons, but it's because they got a particularly large section of a particularly large class to judge, or they had some potentially disqualifying event occur that they had to do some hard work to resolve, or they had an apprentice judge with them, and they took extra time to let the apprentice judge score the point score, or let the apprentice judge go first on most of the decisions. And so it's possible for one team or more to finish ahead of the others. And it can be helpful to keep the show moving if the show chair assigns them to judge an unjudged class. But don't just go over and judge it without checking with the show chair, because there may be a good reason why he didn't want your team to be judging that class. And we had the very unfortunate circumstance several years ago at a national show where we had way too many judges, and when the judges, one of the teams got done early, and proceeded to go around the show and rejudge the classes that other judges had judged. And they had a particular objection to a red ribbon that was awarded in place of blue ribbon in a particular class. And notwithstanding that the rules of the guidelines say that the judge's decision is final, they managed to convince the national chair that that particular section of a class had to be rejudged. And not only that, they brought in all of the available judges to judge it. And they rejudged it, and blues prevailed over the red over a 60-40 margin. And so that ribbon was changed from red to blue, and it moved on to head up to be considered for Queen of the Show. Well, you can expect that the team that originally judged that class was not particularly thrilled with that result. Some of the rest of us who thought the guidelines should prevail, when it says the judge's decision is final, were not thrilled with that result. However, I guess the only good news I can see out of that is that Rose did end up as the king of the show. If there's a serious continuing problem with another judge on interpreting the guidelines or otherwise, it's the competency. You raise it with the district or national judging chair, not the show chair, not other exhibitors, and see if we need to talk to the judge to explain the guidelines, or to question whether they weren't feeling well that day, or just exactly what was going on. But that's a matter to be, within the judging fraternity, and a very rare occasion. In all my years of judging, I've only worked with one or two judges that were just clearly incompetent. It's a long process to get certified as a judge and to keep that certification. And so there are very few incompetent people that are out there judging. Then in addition, there are just the general responsibilities of accredited judges. And these are all in section 1. All of this stuff is in section 1 of the guidelines. Section 1 because it is important. You have to maintain your MRS membership and pay your dues on time. Been embarrassed a couple of times when we've got recruited judges for shows and talked to the ARS and they are no longer members in good standing. They haven't paid their dues. All of a sudden, you're now short a judge or two. As a judge, you need to, in a timely manner, satisfy your recertification education requirements. 4 credits in 4 years, that's not really very strict. And report your attendance to the district chair as well as the ARS. The ARS's records have been notoriously incomplete and conflicting. If you report to your district chair, also, district chair can verify with the ARS that you've gotten what your credits are and know where you stand. We had just so many problems last year when we got down to a deadline, and basically because of COVID and because of a dearth of judging schools, we had people that needed most of their credits, and after the judging season was over last year, and both in 2022 and 2022 and 2023. Diane worked very hard to have 2 seminars in 22 and 23, and to be sure that every judge had at least 2 opportunities to get their 4 credits to be recertified. And we still had a bunch of judges that didn't get themselves recertified. So we need to try to keep that from happening again. Need to keep up with the changes in the guidelines. A whole new group is coming out now. Linda's going to talk about them in just a minute, but they're going to be available to be read very shortly. You need to visit you not only need to grow roses, grow new roses, but you also need to look for new roses. Go to visit garden centers, visit the local rose gardens. If you're ever on vacation somewhere, find out if they've got a rose garden in town. Go take a look at it. Just keep up with the new gardens. You look at the new roses in the American Rose magazine. That's not too hard. Look at the roses in review for highly rated new varieties. See if you can get pictures of those. Exhibiting, of course, is important. That's where we always have judging classes, so the judges keep up with their exhibiting. Under the new rules, there will be many more opportunities to exhibit, we think. And so that by exhibiting, with the old cliche, you need to show them to grow them. You need to grow them to show them, and you need to show them to judge them. You need to participate in teaching judging schools and seminars, both local, district, and national like these. When called on to volunteer, volunteer. And be sure you're working off the current guidelines when you're doing the teaching. And speak at programs for exhibitors in your local clubs. Evaluate and mentor apprentice judges. We're going to have a few apprentice judges now, and it's an important job. When they're assigned to go with you for a show, they have 5 shows, they have 5 different judges to work with. Prepare for that and take time afterwards to review with them. I always do my evaluation. I send it to the ARS, and I also send it to the apprentice so it knows what I should have, having talked to them after the show, expressed my opinion on what they needed to work on and what they did really well on. But they can see what was actually reported to the ARS if I send them a copy of my evaluation. Last, dress appropriately. When I first started judging, men always wore a coat and a tie. And I'm not going to criticize women's apparel, but it then evolved into, well, at least a sport coat. It has now evolved into sort of what they call in the business world as business casual. A nice collared dress shirt, some nice slacks with and comfortable but appropriate shoes. maybe in Hawaii or California, you could judge in a Hawaiian shirt, but no shorts, no flip-flops. One of the judges, a veteran judge, when I started, said, you ought to be able to tell the judges from the exhibitors. Because that's going to be blurred, I guess, because a lot of judges are going to be exhibitors. But that was the standard that we went on. And then wear your ribbon proudly. Wear it when you're around the show as well as when you're judging it. So people know you're a judge and stop. And if they don't know you, introduce themselves and ask you questions. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I think we'll be moving on then to the last program for the evening. And this one is going to be presented by Linda Clark. And Linda is the district director for the Pacific Southwest District. She actually spoke the first week of our seminar series. Linda, along with Lois Ann Helgeson, were just instrumental in pulling together suggestions for changes for our horticultural guidelines, and really can't thank them enough for the work that they've done to help that. Now, again, as we've said before, we actually held discussions with our district chairs from all 18 districts. So this was really a team effort, and I really appreciated the attendance and the conversations that took place during those meetings. So at this point, I'd like to just turn this over to Linda Clark.
Thanks, Dan. Let's see. So I think you can see this now. Hopefully you can. Welcome, guys. Thank you very much. I'll try to make
So
it quick.
Linda, we're seeing the slideshow on, it's in.
Play
when
for
it started.
There we
Yeah. Got it.
Sorry, one little thing. I'm sorry. I always
No
find
problem.
it really hard because you can't see anything except this. All right.
Got
So
it.
recent guideline changes. I should have put 2024 on there, but I didn't because it is a 2024. Thanks to a great team and board approval, we're in the process of final posting. So hopefully in the next week or so, you'll be able to go to the website and find all of the changes that I am going to outline with you today. Just like Bob's done and most of the other people, get to know your judging handbook. One of the most important chapters is what Bob just went over. It's all about judging ethics. You got to be positive, flexible. You have a lot of obligations to exhibitors in the show. And one of the things that I've always thought you had to do was to bring something to enter, because you don't have a show without blooms. And so as anybody, exhibitor or judge, bring something to the show. And like Bob says, you want to be available. You want to be available to answer questions. You want to be available to help educate anybody who had a question about stuff. And so that's something that you want to make sure you do. All right, let's see. Entry tags. This is a picture of our entry tags. The new language says ARS tags are recommended. They're available at rose.org. The show committee is encouraged to provide ARS tags for exhibitors to use. If other tags are used, they should match the ARS tags as closely as possible. Pacific Northwest District, they sent me a picture of what theirs looks like, and it looks almost like American Rose Society, and they've done that and been real successful with it. Some of the other things is it says a penalty, though unlikely, may be assessed if the tags are distracting. And you'd use the 10 points given to balance and proportion, which is used to assess the overall quality of the exhibit. And it's cited at 4.6. One of the things that might be different, although it doesn't have to be, is multiple entries. Our show has used multiple entries for about 4 years now, and it really greatly increases the size of the show, which ultimately is what we want. So we're encouraged to enter more than one. Most good exhibitors won't do very much of that, but if you have extra, it's really, it really adds to the show to be able to enter more than one. And if you're a new exhibitor, it's nice to be able to bring 2 blossoms of the same and enter them both. A show schedule may limit or prohibit multiple entries by exhibitors in any or all classes. And the way we've done that is we've had to limit bowls because of our properties. So if you have a property issue, lack of properties, or you want to limit, you're welcome to add that to the show schedule. But the ARS supports multiple entries now. One just slight difference on stem and foliage, you know, it's the 20 points. The foliage must be clean, healthy, free from insect damage, even leaf cutter bee damage. Leaf cutter bee damage is considered a fault and subject to a penalty according to the degree of impairment. So it's just like any other fault and penalization. So that's a little change, because in the other guidelines it said you had to overlook that, but that was just not, it didn't really help. I had to reread the stem on stem because I just didn't want to send any misinformation out, and I reread it, and it said not a cause for disqualification on any variety. It's only a potential penalization. So it's not something that has to be penalized, and you really shouldn't overly penalize it, as stem and foliage only accounts for 20% of the total score. So yes, it can be used to improve the balance and proportion. I just happen to have a mini that has a, let's see. Oh yeah, I'll just hold it up because I don't know what you can see. But this is a mini called Amber Star, and it has a stem on stem where I would probably be able to sink this close to the lip of the vase so nobody would ever know that it's there, or you're not supposed to know, and it would still improve the balance and proportion. So it shouldn't probably get any penalization because it probably wouldn't affect any of the look other than it's better. So I just wanted to go through that again because again, everybody's been harping on this: point scoring, form, color, substance. It's just like your mantra. Size is a little different now than it used to be. Okay, we have size because it used to be that miniatures were like seen for their tininess and mini floras were seen for their largeness. But with the new wave of all the different hybridizers and all the kind of varying sizes for any mini flora or mini, we've come to the conclusion that they should not be penalized or rewarded if the size is typical of the variety. So as you see, most of these happen to be mini floras, and they're all about the same, but that doesn't mean that all mini floras are about this same size, because there's some mini floras like Gift of Love and different ones that are way out, they're way larger than the others. So they're not going to get any more points, but they would not get penalized as well. So this is Mango Blush, we have Surprise, and we have Julie Hearn, all mini floras about the same size, and they would just get, Mango Blush can get really large, but they would just be judged against other Mango Blushes, not against each other. And then, of course, we have minis that have the same kind of thing. They're not going to get any more points for being smaller, neither will they get penalized for being larger. Okay. Oh, decorative form. We had some, how shall I say? Decorative form can be a little bit tricky. It is not a class for roses that have expired their hybrid tea form. It's a class for where the intent of the rose was to be something other than hybrid tea form. It would be roses like Crazy Love, which of course you see on the picture. It would also be roses like Pop Art, Sweet Mademoiselle, State of Grace, even Wild Blue Yonder is probably considered a decorative form rose, although it might be just a semi-double. I think we're really going to have to pay attention closely to a local show. We're going to have to pay attention and to each judge being able to actually do this and make a decision for their local show schedule and for the people of their district. I think some people were talking about South Africa. I had a South Africa, and South Africa might be considered a hybrid tea formed rose, except in our climate, it really probably looks best as it's fully open. And it's decorative form. So that's why I had that listed. I took it off. It's not supposed to confuse us. It's supposed to just give us a place. This is Pop Art. It even has hybrid tea form in a minute, but that's not the intent of this rose. The intent of this rose is to show a beautiful kind of old-fashioned or English style rose. And so this was called a classic decorative form. You know, small minis like Marietta, Baby Austin, those are kind of decorative form minis. I'm not sure of any mini decorative form mini floras yet, but that just is my limitation, not probably what is available. This is probably the most controversial, as Bob mentioned before. A lot of people haven't tried this, and to be honest, I've tried it only for the last few years. We've had nothing but success. The Pacific Northwest, my mentors, have already had this in place for years after years after years. So I wanted the ARs to be able to open it up to changing some of the things to increase the size of the show and to help exhibitors and help judges have a place to exhibit more and to judge more. So all judges judging a show are encouraged to show following show schedule rules. It's up to local show chairs to decide what procedures to implement in regards to that. One of the things that we had something to consider is if judges are judging and they have an entry in that certain class, how and when do they step back? So those are some things that you might want to, as show chair, be able to discuss with your judges, the judges meeting beforehand. Like, do you step back at just the class, or do you step back at the whole section, or do you just waive yourself from that, from judging that one variety? So it's kind of up to you. We just had a show, we had judges enter, and the judges step back, usually one or two varieties in front of where they are showing, so that you don't really say, oh, they have it in this one. They just step back for a few things. And the way our show states is that we don't ballot for queen. So if you have a entry in the queen classes, you just don't ballot. You can do everything else, but you won't ballot for queen. Now it's up to you how you want to handle that. It works really well for us. We've done that. I've done that at National Show, and we've done it here for the last few years, and we don't have any problems. So I really encourage you to try it. I know change is hard. I know it's hard, but I do encourage you to try it. Try a little bit if you can. I do think it's going to be a wave of the future and something that will help us have bigger shows and better shows. The other thing that we had to adjust due to our lack of national shows is our rotating awards. We still have the rotating awards where districts may offer, if they choose, one of the national shows. You are given, I think there's 18 of them that rotate through this schedule that hopefully is posted. And you can pick the one that corresponds to the year of your district. We've done that for the last 2 districts now, and it's worked really well. These are the 7 national horticultural show awards that are only available at the national show. If you are putting on a national show, you can choose any one of these 7 or all of them, and you can choose any of the 18 rotating national awards as well. So it's really up to you as a national show chair how and what you want to feature. I don't think it should affect anybody really. All right, discussion.